I don't think I'll ever forget the sound my son made that morning, this tiny, soft giggle that felt like it cracked something open inside me. I was swaying him in my arms, humming some random tune I'd probably made up after 3 nights without sleep, when I noticed my husband standing in the doorway. He was holding a cup of coffee, but his hand wasn't moving. His whole body just froze. At first, I thought something was wrong. Maybe he was worried about the baby, or maybe I looked so exhausted he didn't know what to say. But no, what I saw in his eyes wasn't fear. It was something much heavier. Something I couldn't read, and that scared me more than anything. He stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. And then he whispered, barely audible, "I have to tell you something." Those words, they felt like the floor dropped out from under me. You know how people talk about their heart skipping a beat? Mine didn't skip, it tripped, stumbled, and fell flat on its face. Because in that moment, holding our newborn, my first thought was that he was leaving. Or worse, that he didn't want our baby. But he didn't say anything else. He just stood there, breathing harder than I'd ever seen him breathe, like he was preparing for something painful. And suddenly, every memory of us, every date, every fight, every late-night shift, every broken dream and patched-together morning, started flashing through my mind, like I was about to lose all of it at once. But before I tell you what he confessed that day, I need to tell you how it all began. Because nothing, absolutely nothing, about our story makes sense unless you understand where we started. And trust me, we started from nothing. I met him on a Wednesday. Rainy, cold, and annoying in every possible way. I was rushing to catch my bus after a double shift, shoes soaked, umbrella turned inside out, hair sticking to my face like I'd lost a fight with a wind tunnel. Honestly, I must have looked like a disaster. He was standing under the awning of a little bookstore, trying to shake water from his jacket. He wasn't doing a great job, every movement just made it worse, and for some reason that made me laugh. He looked over, caught me watching, and instead of getting embarrassed or annoyed, he smiled. This soft, calm smile that felt way too gentle for a day that awful. "Rough night?" he asked. I remember thinking, "Sir, rough is an understatement." But I just nodded. We waited together in silence for the rain to calm, not talking much, just standing side by side. But something about him felt grounding. Safe. Like I could actually breathe for a second. When my bus finally came, he surprised me by running after me and calling out, "Wait, can I walk you home instead?" And here's the crazy part, I let him. I don't know why. I should have said no. I didn't know him. I was exhausted, dripping wet, and definitely not trying to impress anyone. But there was something in his voice, something warm, careful, that made it impossible to say no. So we walked. And talked. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was pushing through life alone. Our first date wasn't really a date. We ordered cheap takeout, sat on the floor of my tiny apartment, because I didn't even have a proper couch, and talked until the sky started getting light. He listened to me in a way no one else ever had. Like my thoughts were something precious. And I learned that he was struggling too. Not with money exactly, at least, that's what he said back then, but with finding direction, finding stability, figuring out what he wanted to do. We bonded over that feeling of being stuck, trying to build something from scraps while the world kept handing us bills, setbacks, and complications. What I didn't know, what I had no idea about, was that half of what he said wasn't true. Not because he was a liar, but because he was terrified. Terrified that if I knew the truth, I wouldn't stay. The first year together was beautiful and messy. We worked different shifts, barely slept, burned dinners, argued over tiny things like laundry or groceries. We counted every dollar. Sometimes we couldn't even do that, because some months we didn't have a full dollar left to count. But he was always there. Always showing up. Always believing that someday, somehow, things would get better. He worked nights at a warehouse, and I worked mornings at the cafe. We'd meet in the middle, me tired, him exhausted, sharing one cheap sandwich between us, laughing like it was a feast. My parents tried to help where they could, but they weren't wealthy either. They'd slip us $20 here and there for emergencies, though honestly everything felt like an emergency back then. But even in those moments, using coins to pay for gas, splitting instant noodles, fixing things with tape instead of buying new ones, he never complained. Not once. And that made me trust him even more. When he proposed, he didn't have a ring. He didn't even have a plan. We were sitting on the steps outside our building, sharing a blanket and listening to music from someone else's open window. He looked at me, eyes tired and hopeful, and said, "I don't know when or how, but I want a life with you. Will you marry me?" I remember laughing, not because it was funny, but because I had never been so sure about anything in my life. We saved for months. Every penny. Every spare dollar. Every tip I got at work. Every extra shift he could pick up. We skipped outings, skipped holidays, skipped everything except each other. And finally, we had enough for the simplest, smallest wedding. Nothing fancy. Nothing grand. Just us, a few friends, family, and a promise we'd already been living long before saying it out loud. Those pictures. I still look at them sometimes. My dress wasn't expensive. His suit didn't fit perfectly. But the smiles? Those were real. Pure. The kind you can't fake or force. Back then, I thought I knew him completely. I thought I knew every worry, every dream, every flaw. But I didn't. Not yet. Marriage brought new challenges, bigger bills, long nights, new responsibilities. And then came the pregnancy. Beautiful, terrifying, overwhelming. He held my hair back when I got sick. He rubbed my back. He talked to my belly every night like our baby could already hear him. When labor came, he didn't leave my side for a second. Not one moment. And after our baby was born, after all the chaos and fear and beauty of it, that's when everything changed. Because that morning, when he found me rocking our son, that's when he finally told me the truth. But that's for the next chapter. I think the strangest part about remembering those early days is realizing just how blind I was. Not blind in the silly, careless way, blind the way you are when you truly love someone, when you trust them so much that the thought of a secret feels impossible. Looking back, I can see 1,000 tiny moments that should have made me question things. A hesitation here. A strange phone call there. Nights when he came home more exhausted than any job should have made him. But back then, none of that mattered. I was too busy dreaming of a future I didn't know he'd already built without telling me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. After the wedding, life didn't magically get easier. If anything, it got harder. Marriage doesn't come with a guidebook, and ours definitely didn't come with money, stability, or any kind of security. What it did come with was commitment. And stubbornness. And two people who believed that as long as they held on tight enough, the world couldn't break them. We moved into a tiny one-bedroom apartment a week after the wedding. The walls were so thin we could hear our neighbors arguing about everything, from laundry to politics to who finished the last piece of pizza. The plumbing groaned every time someone on another floor showered. Our bedroom window faced a blinking streetlight that seemed determined to ruin our sleep. But we were happy. Exhausted, broke, and constantly improvising, but happy. He kept his warehouse job. I kept the cafe. And together we built a rhythm that somehow worked. Morning kisses. Passing each other in the doorway like baton runners in a race. Handwritten notes left on the counter, little things like "I love you" or "don't forget to eat" or "please don't panic but I think the fridge is dying again." But slowly, things began to shift. I started noticing that he'd come home some nights looking drained. Not physically, but emotionally. Like he'd been carrying something heavy all day and was too tired to put it down. I'd ask, "Everything okay?" And he'd smile, this small, practiced smile, and answer, "Yeah. Just work." But the way he said it didn't match the way he looked. There were moments, so small I barely registered them, when I'd wake up in the middle of the night and find him sitting on the couch in the dark. Not watching TV. Not on his phone. Just sitting there, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor like he was trying to solve something impossible. When I'd ask what he was doing, he always said the same thing: couldn't sleep. Go back to bed. And I did. Because I trusted him. Because I loved him. Because I believed that if something was wrong, he'd tell me. We were partners. That's what partners do. Right? But now I know the truth, he wasn't struggling to share his problems. He was struggling to hide them. We had dreams, of course. Everyone does. But ours were simple, almost painfully simple. A better car. A bigger apartment. Enough savings to feel like we weren't constantly standing on the edge of a cliff. Maybe, one day, a house with a little yard. And someday, a family. But money was always the enemy. Always slipping through our fingers no matter how tightly we tried to hold it. There were nights when we'd sit at the kitchen table surrounded by bills, calculators, and scraps of paper covered in scribbles, trying to convince ourselves the numbers would magically rearrange if we stared hard enough. We'll figure it out, he'd always say. And somehow, we always did, just barely. His parents lived out of state. Mine visited when they could, usually bringing groceries or slipping cash into my coat pockets when they thought I didn't notice. I always noticed. And every time, I felt both grateful and guilty. But guilt didn't pay bills, so I learned to say thank you and push the shame to the side. The real turning point came the night he came home at nearly 3 a.m. I was sitting on the couch waiting for him, pretending I hadn't been crying out of worry. As soon as he walked in, I stood up, ready to snap at him for not calling, but the words died in my throat the moment I saw his face. He looked shaken. Pale. Not tired, scared. Where were you? I asked, my voice smaller than I meant it to be. He closed the door slowly, like his hands were heavier than the wood. Work ran late, he said. But something about the way he said it felt wrong. The tone. The hesitation. The way his eyes avoided mine. I knew him well enough to know when he was hiding something. Still, I didn't push. I should've. But I didn't. Because I trusted him, and trust sometimes makes you quieter when you should be louder. He took a shower, crawled into bed beside me, and wrapped his arms around me like he was afraid I'd disappear. I asked him once more if everything was okay. And he whispered, "Yeah. I've got us." I didn't sleep that night. And judging by the way he kept adjusting his breathing, neither did he. A few weeks later, he started picking up extra shifts. At least, that's what he called them. Late nights. Early mornings. Sometimes both. The kind of schedule no one could stick to without burning out. But he didn't complain. He said it was temporary. He said we needed the money. He said he wanted to make our lives better. And I believed him. Because why wouldn't I? He had never given me a reason not to. Around that time, we started saving for the wedding we never had. A real ceremony. A real celebration. Something small but beautiful, something that felt like us. We didn't have a date yet, but dreaming about it kept us going. On the nights we couldn't afford dinner, we'd scroll through wedding cakes online like kids looking through toy catalogs. We'd talk about vows, music, the kind of flowers neither of us could name. We even picked our first dance song, lying on the floor with a shared pair of cheap headphones. He held me so tight during that song that I remember thinking he never wanted to let go. Now I understand why. When we finally saved enough for our ceremony, it felt like a miracle. A slow, exhausting, beautiful miracle. Neither of us had families that could pay for a wedding, so every little piece of it was ours, our work, our sacrifice, our effort. And that made it feel sacred. The day itself was perfect in the most imperfect ways. The chairs didn't match. The speaker system cut out twice. My hair wouldn't stay the way I wanted it to. His tie was crooked. The cake was smaller than pictured. But when I walked toward him, and he looked at me like I was the only person in the universe, none of that mattered. We danced barefoot. We laughed. We cried. We promised each other forever. He was shaking when he said his vows. I thought it was emotion. But now I know it was fear. Because he already knew he wasn't telling me the whole story. After we got married, something about him changed, just a little. Not in a bad way, but in a deeper way. He held me longer. He stared at me more often, almost like he was memorizing me. He asked about my day with an intensity that made me blush. And sometimes, when I caught him watching me cook or laugh or just fold laundry, he looked relieved. Like he was grateful I was there. Grateful I was his. Grateful I didn't know something that he wasn't ready to share. I thought he was just happy. I didn't know he was searching for the right moment to tell me the truth. The moment he finally felt safe enough to do it. And that moment wouldn't come until the day our son was born. But before that, before everything unraveled and rewove itself into something bigger than I could have imagined, life took us through one more storm. Because pregnancy changes everything. Marriage changes everything. But secrets. Secrets change you before you even realize it. I didn't know it then, but the months leading up to my pregnancy were shaping both of us in ways we couldn't see. We were still young, still learning, still believing that love alone could hold the roof from collapsing on our heads. And maybe it could have, if life didn't keep throwing storms at us without warning. But sometimes storms don't destroy you. Sometimes they force you to build something stronger. Those months were exactly that. They were the slow, grinding test of our patience, hope, and strength, and even though we didn't realize it at the time, they were quietly preparing us for the moment everything in our lives would shift forever. It started small. Tiny changes. The kind that creep in quietly and sit in the corner, waiting for you to notice them. He became more tired. More distant in little ways. Not emotionally distant, not from me. But distant in his mind. Like part of him was somewhere else, fighting a battle he couldn't talk about. I'd find him staring at his phone with this strange, conflicted look, like he was reading something he wished wasn't real. When I asked, he always said it was nothing important, and I believed him. Or, no, I wanted to believe him. And that's not the same thing, is it? We were still working ourselves into the ground. I was exhausted. He was exhausted. We were living inside this loop of constant effort, constant sacrifice, constant worry. I thought that was why he seemed off sometimes. I thought it was stress, money, sleep deprivation, fear of the future, any normal reason. Never once did it cross my mind that he was hiding an entirely different life. Not a different relationship. Not a different family. A different level of existence. But we'll get to that. Right now, I want to tell you about the moment when our dreams felt both closer and further away than ever. It was a Tuesday, one of those gray, heavy Tuesdays that feel more like background noise than a real day. I remember because I had worked a brutal morning shift, got yelled at by a customer, burned my hand on the coffee machine, and spilled an entire tray of drinks. By the time my shift ended, I felt like a wrung-out towel. I took the bus home, head against the window, watching raindrops race each other down the glass. All I wanted was a hug. A shower. Something warm to eat. Sleep. But when I got home, he wasn't there. He always beat me home on Tuesdays. Always. His shift ended earlier on those days. We had a little ritual. He'd make dinner, I'd come home, we'd eat together and talk about our day. It was small, but it was ours. That day, the apartment was silent. Cold. Empty. I called him. No answer. I texted. Nothing. I tried again. Nothing. For someone who'd already lost too many things in life, silence is never just silence. It's memory. It's fear. It's panic wearing a familiar face. By the time he finally came home, almost an hour later, I was sitting on the floor by the door, biting my nails until my fingers hurt. When he walked in, he looked startled to see me like that. "Hey," he said softly, "why are you on the floor?" I didn't want to sound dramatic, so I kept it simple. "You didn't answer." He froze for a second. Just a second. But enough. His eyes flickered with guilt, concern, something else I couldn't name back then. "My phone died," he said. "I'm sorry, babe." I nodded. But deep down, something tightened inside me. Something small and sharp. Not suspicion. Not yet. Just worry. Now, looking back, I know why he hesitated. He wasn't lying about the phone being dead. He was lying about why. Money was tight then, tighter than it had ever been. Rent went up. The old car needed repairs. Work hours got cut. It felt like every time we took a step forward, life shoved us 2 steps back. But we weren't quitters. We'd sit at that little kitchen table night after night, crunching numbers, cutting expenses, trying to stretch what little we had. We made it work, even when making it work meant eating pasta for dinner 4 nights in a row and hoping the electricity bill wouldn't come in too high. Through all of it, he kept telling me, "I got us. I promise." That promise became the thread that held everything together. One night, after a particularly stressful week, we had one of those deep, raw conversations that only happen when you're both too tired to pretend everything is fine. We were lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of our old fan. And out of nowhere, he said, "Do you ever think we deserve more?" I turned my head. "More what?" "More than this. More than struggling all the time. More than scraping by. More than this life." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was the exact thought I had been carrying all day. "Of course I do," I said. "Everyone deserves more. But we'll get there. Slowly." He stayed quiet for a long time. Too long. I remember that silence now, how heavy it felt. "I want to give you everything," he whispered. And I believed him. Not because of the words, but because of the way he said them. Like it hurt him that he couldn't do it yet. If only I'd known that he already could. I found out I was pregnant on a Wednesday morning. I was late for work, rushing, hair a mess, half awake, and trying to find a clean pair of socks when I realized it had been longer than it should have been since my last cycle. I don't know why that morning felt different, but something in my body whispered, "Take a test." So I did. I remember pacing the bathroom, staring at the little stick on the counter like it was going to explode. When the second line appeared, I sat on the floor and covered my face with both hands. I wasn't sad. I wasn't scared. I was overwhelmed. Completely and utterly overwhelmed. A baby. A life. A new chapter we weren't financially ready for. And yet, my heart felt full. I waited for him to come home, sitting on the couch with the test in my hand, trying to figure out how to tell him. Should I be dramatic? Should I be cute? Should I just yell it the second he walked in? When he finally opened the door, looking exhausted and drenched from the rain, I forgot all my ideas. I just stood up, walked to him, and handed him the test. His face went through about 5 different emotions at once. Shock. Fear. Joy. Disbelief. And something like relief? But the last one didn't make sense to me until much later. He pulled me into his arms so tight I couldn't breathe. He buried his face in my shoulder and said, "We're going to be okay." I swear. I hadn't even said anything yet. I hadn't cried or panicked or expressed a single fear. But he said it anyway. Like he had been waiting for this. Like he had been preparing for something. Like this was the moment he knew he could no longer hide forever. Pregnancy wasn't glamorous. Not for me, anyway. Morning sickness hit me like a truck. I'd throw up, then cry, then laugh at myself for crying, then throw up again. My emotions were everywhere. My appetite was inconsistent. My back hurt. My feet hurt. My hair did whatever it wanted. I felt like a science experiment half the time. But he transformed. He became gentler. Softer. Kinder. More attentive than he had ever been in our entire relationship. He massaged my back. He brought me snacks at ridiculous hours. He learned how to make the exact soup I craved at 3 a.m. He rubbed my swollen feet. He talked to the baby every night, whispering tiny little promises. And even though he was still working insane hours, he made time for me. Real time. Quality time. Time that made me feel like I wasn't just carrying our child, I was carrying our future. But every now and then, between the smiles, between the excitement, between the planning, I'd catch something in his eyes. A secret. A shadow. Something unsaid. And I would tell myself, "You're hormonal. You're imagining things." But I wasn't. The night everything almost fell apart happened when I was 7 months pregnant. I woke up around 2 in the morning, thirsty, uncomfortable, needing to stretch. When I went to the kitchen for water, I found him sitting at the dining table with papers spread out in front of him. Papers I had never seen before. He didn't hear me. His head was in his hands, shoulders tense, breathing unsteady. I stepped closer, and that's when he quickly swept the papers into a folder, shoving them away as if they were dangerous. He finally looked up at me. His eyes were red. Like he had been crying. "Baby," I whispered, "what's wrong?" He shook his head. "Nothing. Couldn't sleep." He said it too quickly. My heart dropped. Not because I thought he was cheating, not even close. No. It was something deeper. A different kind of fear. Like he was drowning in something he couldn't tell me about. "Talk to me," I said softly. "I can't," he whispered. It was the first time he had ever said that. And it broke me. I didn't push him. I didn't yell. I didn't demand answers. I just walked over, took his hand, and rested it on my belly where our baby was kicking. His eyes softened. He kissed my forehead. But nothing was solved. Nothing was explained. Nothing was better. The truth was coming. The weight of it was crushing him. And I still had no idea what it was. The day we brought our baby into the world was both the most terrifying and the most beautiful day of my life. He held my hand during every contraction, whispered to me, coached me, stayed by my side like I was the center of his universe. When our son finally cried for the first time, he broke down completely. Not just a few tears. Not just a little emotional moment. He sobbed. Hard. His whole body shook. I thought he was crying because of the birth. Because of the miracle of it. Because of the overwhelming love. And maybe he was. But now I know there was more to it. Because when he held our son for the first time, something inside him snapped. Or woke up. Or became impossible to hide. Something huge. Something life-changing. Something he had buried so deep he thought he could live without ever revealing it. But holding his son made him realize he couldn't. And he wouldn't. Not anymore. Because within a few days, when we finally got home, exhausted but happy, he began to change in ways I couldn't explain. He stared at us like we were his entire world. Like everything he had ever planned, built, or feared had suddenly found its center. And then came the morning, the moment that would change our lives forever. The moment he'd walk into the room, see me rocking our newborn, and finally let the truth break free from the place he had locked it away. But that belongs to the next chapter. I used to think that love alone could keep two people standing, even when the world around them was falling apart. And maybe that was true, at least in the beginning. Maybe that belief was the only reason we survived those first months after the wedding, months filled with jobs we hated, bills we couldn't keep up with, and arguments that started from nothing but exhaustion. I remember lying awake some nights, watching the faint glow of the streetlights spill across our tiny bedroom, wondering if we'd made a terrible mistake trying to build a life with so little to stand on. But then he would roll over, pull me into his arms, and whisper, "We'll figure it out. I promise." And somehow, I believed him. Those early days felt like one long blur of rushing between shifts, barely seeing each other, and sharing meals that were more silence than conversation. I worked mornings at the cafe, then evenings at a cleaning service. He picked up night shifts at a warehouse after spending his days trying to land a full-time position. We were young, tired, constantly broke, but underneath all that, there was this unshakable bond. A stubborn kind of loyalty that kept us moving forward even when our feet felt like they were sinking into sand. I always tell people that poverty doesn't just test your finances, it tests your tenderness, your patience, your softness. And there were times when it felt like all of that was draining out of us. Times when I snapped at him for no reason. Times when he came home too tired to smile and I took it personally. Sometimes we went to bed angry, facing opposite walls, pretending we didn't feel the cold space between our backs. But then, the next morning, one of us would reach out first. Always. A hand on the shoulder. A kiss on the forehead. A quiet "I'm sorry." And that was enough to keep going. The hardest part wasn't the work or the money, it was the waiting. Waiting for something to change. Waiting for life to stop being so relentlessly heavy. Waiting for one moment where we didn't have to choose between paying rent or fixing the car, between groceries or utilities. The kind of choices that wear down even the strongest love if you let them. As time went on, we learned how to carry the weight together. How to not crumble under pressure. We learned to celebrate tiny victories, paying off a bill early, finding a cheaper grocery store, managing to cook dinner before midnight. We learned how to communicate, how to argue without destroying each other, how to forgive without keeping score. And then, the test that changed everything. I still remember sitting in the bathroom with the pregnancy test in my hand, watching the second line appear like it had been hiding under the surface, waiting for the worst possible time to show itself. I felt joy and fear crashing into each other so hard that my hands started shaking. I wasn't sure how we were going to manage a baby when we could barely manage ourselves. But at the same time, something inside me whispered that maybe this was the turning point. Maybe this was the moment where our struggle finally meant something. When I told him, he didn't say a word at first. He just stared at me like he was trying to memorize every detail of my face. Then he wrapped his arms around me so tightly that I could barely breathe. "We'll make it work," he said. And somehow, I believed him again. The months that followed were the hardest of our lives. My pregnancy drained whatever energy I had left, and his shifts got longer and more demanding. We spent our evenings researching ways to save money, comparing prices, budgeting down to the last cent. Sometimes we joked about writing a book called How Not to Drown When You're Already Underwater. But beneath the jokes, the fear was real. And so was the hope. We leaned on each other harder than we ever had before. I held him when he came home after a 14-hour shift, barely able to stand. He held my hair back when morning sickness left me curled up on the bathroom floor. We fought. We cried. We kept going. And when our daughter was born, everything shifted. I had never seen him look the way he did when he held her for the first time. His eyes softened in a way I'd never witnessed, not even on our wedding day. It was like the world finally gave us something good without asking for anything in return. Something pure. Something we could both hold on to when everything else felt unstable. But her arrival didn't magically solve our problems. In fact, it added new ones. Sleepless nights. Medical bills. Extra expenses we hadn't prepared for. I felt like I was constantly running on empty, feeding her, comforting her, praying she would sleep long enough for me to catch my breath. And through it all, he worked even harder, taking extra shifts, coming home more exhausted than ever. There were moments when I felt guilty for depending on him so much. Moments when I wondered if he resented me, or the baby, or the life we'd built from scratch. But he never said a word that suggested it. If anything, he grew softer. More patient. Kinder. Sometimes I'd catch him watching us, me holding our daughter, or humming to her while she slept, and there was something in his expression I couldn't interpret. Not sadness. Not fear. Something deeper. Something he never explained. I didn't know then that he was living with a secret. A secret so huge it could have changed our lives in an instant. A secret he kept locked behind his tired eyes and quiet smiles. And the part that haunts me most is that I didn't question it. Because I trusted him completely. Because our love had been forged in hardship, and I believed he had nothing to hide from me. I had no idea that everything I thought I knew about him, about our life, about the future we were building, was about to shatter and rebuild itself in ways I could never have imagined. I didn't know the truth was already starting to crack through the surface. I didn't know he was preparing to tell me something that would rewrite our entire story. And I definitely didn't know that the moment it happened, it would begin with the simplest thing in the world. Watching me play with our newborn. I think every relationship has a moment, a quiet, almost invisible moment, where something shifts before you even realize it. A moment you look back on and say, that was it. That was when everything started changing. For us, that moment began the day our daughter arrived, though I didn't see it at the time. Those early weeks felt like living inside a storm cloud. Everything was soft and blurry and overwhelming. I slept in pieces. I ate when I remembered to. My emotions lived on some wild roller coaster where I cried because the baby smiled, then cried again because the bottle spilled, then laughed for no reason at all. And he tried to catch every part of me that fell apart, even when he was close to collapsing himself. But somewhere between the midnight feedings and the piles of tiny clothes and the sound of her fragile breathing, something inside him began to move. Quietly. Carefully. Like a door creaking open inside his chest. At first, I blamed it on exhaustion. Then I blamed it on stress. Later, I blamed it on myself. And the truth was, I didn't know what to blame it on. He would hold her for so long sometimes that I had to remind him to put her down. He'd stare at her face with this deep, almost afraid admiration, like she was something he had borrowed from the universe and wasn't entirely sure he deserved to keep. Sometimes he'd kiss her forehead and whisper things so quietly I couldn't hear them. Sometimes he'd just rest his cheek against her hair and close his eyes like he wanted to disappear into the moment. But then, every now and then, I'd catch a flicker of something else. Something heavier. One night, I woke to find him sitting on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, both hands covering his face. The baby was asleep beside me, breathing softly, her tiny fists balled up like she was ready to fight her dreams. I touched his back gently. "Are you okay?" He nodded, but he didn't look at me. "Yeah. I'm fine." But his voice cracked on the last word. Later that week, he started waking up earlier than usual, not to go to work, not to help with the baby, but to sit alone in the living room before the sun even touched the windows. I heard him sometimes, whispering to himself or pacing in circles like he was working through a conversation inside his mind. When I asked him what he was doing, he'd smile too quickly and say, "Just thinking." But thinking doesn't make your hands tremble. Thinking doesn't keep you awake while your body begs for sleep. Thinking doesn't make your breathing shaky every time I walk into the room. He was struggling with something big. Something so heavy that he carried it like a secret stone in his pocket. And the strange thing was, even though he seemed more distant, I had never felt closer to him. He was tender in ways he hadn't been before. He'd kiss the top of my head for no reason. He'd bring me water without asking. He'd hold my hand while I fed her, brushing my knuckles with his thumb like he was memorizing the shape of me. But that tenderness came with worry. With fear. With hesitation. Sometimes he'd start to say something, open his mouth, breathe in, and then let the moment die in his throat. One day, as I was folding her tiny clothes, this endless parade of pinks and whites and soft fabrics that always smelled like baby powder, I heard him sigh behind me. I turned around and found him leaning against the wall, just looking at me. Not at the clothes. Not at the baby. At me. "You're incredible," he said softly. "You know that?" I laughed, thinking he was joking. "I'm barely functioning." He shook his head. His eyes didn't move from my face. "No. You're incredible. You're real." I didn't understand what he meant, but the way he said it, it sounded like it hurt. That night he barely slept. Every time I opened my eyes, he was awake, staring at the ceiling with this expression like he was waiting for something. Like he was listening for something only he could hear. By morning he looked like he'd aged 5 years. A few days later, something happened that I still replay in my mind. We were both exhausted. The baby had cried nonstop for hours, my back hurt, and he came home looking like he'd carried the entire city on his shoulders. I was rocking her, whispering to her, trying to calm her down. She finally stopped crying and relaxed in my arms, blinking slowly up at me. I didn't know he was watching. I didn't hear him walk into the room. I didn't hear him sit on the edge of the bed. I didn't even know he was there until he whispered, "God, how do you love like that?" I turned, confused. "What do you mean?" But he didn't answer. He just stared at me like he was seeing something he'd never seen before. Later that night, he broke a plate. He wasn't angry, it just slipped from his hand while he was washing dishes. But the moment it shattered on the floor, he froze. Completely. He didn't move. Didn't breathe. His eyes widened with this sudden, sharp panic. I knelt beside him. "It's okay," I said softly. "It's just a plate." He shook his head. "It's not the plate." I placed my hand on his cheek. He closed his eyes, leaned into my touch like he needed it to stay grounded. "Then what is it?" I whispered. He swallowed hard. "It's everything." I didn't push him. Something told me not to. Days turned into weeks. Our daughter grew stronger, louder, more alert. Her little personality started peeking out. She loved humming sounds, hated bright lights, and smiled whenever she felt warmth on her face. And watching him with her became my new favorite thing. He held her like she was both the beginning and the end of his universe. But the heaviness didn't go away. If anything, it grew thicker. One afternoon, I walked into the living room and found him standing at the window, holding her. His reflection in the glass looked like a man haunted by something he couldn't outrun. "She deserves the best," he whispered, still staring out. "She has the best," I replied. He closed his eyes. His jaw tensed. "You don't understand." Then, without warning, he turned and handed her to me gently, almost reverently. His hands lingered on her back for a moment, then dropped to his sides. He looked at me like he was preparing for something that terrified him. His lips parted. He almost spoke. But then he breathed in sharply, shook his head, and walked away. Later that evening, I found out why. He was sitting in the dark again, elbows on his knees, hands pressed together in front of his face like he was praying. When I touched his shoulder, he flinched, not from fear, but from being pulled out of a deep, spiraling thought. "I'm going to tell you something soon," he said quietly. My heart skipped. "Okay, what is it?" He looked at me then, really looked at me, and there was so much in his eyes that I felt my chest tighten. "Not tonight," he said softly. "But soon." And then he walked over to our daughter, who lay sleeping peacefully, and brushed a finger across her cheek with a tenderness so raw it made my throat ache. That was the night I realized the truth wasn't a mistake he made, or a past he was ashamed of, or some burden he didn't want to share. It was something else entirely. A decision. A confession. A transformation. And even though I didn't know what it was yet, I could feel the air around him shifting, like the moment right before a storm breaks. Quiet. Heavy. Inevitable. He was getting ready to change our lives. I had no idea how. I had no idea why. But I could feel it. And the strange thing was, I wasn't afraid. Because whatever he was hiding, whatever he was building the courage to tell me, I could sense one thing clearly. It wasn't going to hurt us. It was going to redefine us. And only later would I understand that the moment he finally broke, the moment his truth began spilling through the cracks, was the moment he saw me playing with our newborn. Laughing softly, holding her close, loving him without knowing anything but the life we had built from scraps. That was the moment he knew I was his safe place. That was the moment he knew he couldn't keep his secret anymore. I never thought a single ordinary morning could carry the weight of a lifetime inside it, but that's exactly what happened the day he finally spoke, the day everything shifted between us, the day the tiny apartment we had built with our own two hands suddenly felt both impossibly small and impossibly vast at the same time. I was sitting on the floor, legs crossed, our daughter cradled in my arms as she yawned and blinked up at me, reaching tiny fingers toward my face, her little hiccups shaking my chest every few seconds, and he came into the room quietly, like he didn't want to disturb anything, like he wasn't sure if what he was about to do would even be allowed by the world. He stood there for a long moment just watching us, and I didn't say anything because there was a shift in him, a weight I could feel pressing through the air, something so heavy that even breathing felt like it could shatter it. I didn't know what to expect, and I think, deep down, I was terrified to find out, but I also knew I had to be ready, because whatever was coming wasn't going to be gentle or small. And then he took a deep breath, the kind that shakes your whole body, and he finally spoke, not with hesitation but with a kind of calm that belied the storm I could see gathering behind his eyes. He said my name softly, almost reverently, and I felt my chest tighten, my heart start to race, my mind trying to guess, trying to imagine, trying to prepare for whatever truth he was about to lay in front of me. I put our daughter gently down in her little blanket nest and sat forward, my hands on my knees, my whole body leaning toward him like I was being pulled by gravity that wasn't natural, that was stronger than anything I'd ever felt, and I saw him lower himself to sit on the floor across from me, looking me directly in the eyes. And for a moment I didn't breathe because the intensity of it pressed down like the air had been sucked out of the room. He reached out and took my hand in both of his, warm, firm, steady, and he said, I need you to know something I've kept from you for all this time because I was afraid it would change how you see me, how you see us, but I can't keep it inside anymore because every time I look at you, at her, at this life we've built, I know I can't lie to you even for a second longer. I swallowed hard, my throat tight, my fingers curling around his, and I whispered, whatever it is, we'll handle it. And he nodded slowly, like he had rehearsed these words 1,000 times but somehow never felt their weight until now, and then he took another deep breath and said, I'm wealthy. I've had a business for years, a real business, more than just the small jobs you know about, millions, enough to live comfortably and never worry about money, and I hid it from you because I didn't know if it was love you wanted or a life of comfort, and I wanted to be sure that the love we had, the bond we built, was real, that it wasn't about anything else, and now I see it, I know it. Because everything I feel when I see you with our daughter, when I see how you love me, how you love her. It's pure, it's true, and I can never go back, I can never take this back, I need you to know the truth, all of it. I felt my heart stop and then start beating faster than ever, my body shaking from the mixture of disbelief and relief and overwhelming love, and I said, barely able to speak, you're telling me this now? After all this time? and he nodded, tears forming in his eyes, and he said, I wanted to wait until I was sure, until I knew you and I could survive everything without it affecting us, and now I know we can, and now I want us to live, really live, without fear, without struggle, with all the comfort and freedom I could ever give you, but I also want us to stay exactly who we are, because that's the real reason I love you. That's why I can't keep this from you any longer. I felt the tears stream down my face, warm, unstoppable, my daughter stirring in her sleep, sensing the change in the room, and I looked at him and saw every single year of struggle, every late night, every tiny sacrifice, every ounce of love and patience, reflected in his eyes, and I just knew, that the life we were about to step into together, the home we were going to build in his real world, the comfort and security he could finally give us, it didn't matter because the love, the real, unbreakable love that had survived poverty, exhaustion, fear, late-night arguments, and every struggle in between, that was ours, untouchable, unshakable, and it was enough. And then he smiled, a slow, trembling smile that broke me open and put me back together at the same time, and he leaned forward to kiss my forehead, and I leaned into him, my daughter between us, and for the first time I truly felt like the weight we had carried for so long, the endless nights and fear and tears and sweat, had led to this one perfect, fragile, overwhelming moment, and I whispered, I love you, and he whispered it back, not just words, but a promise, a confession, a whole lifetime of truth, and I knew in that instant, as we sat together holding the person we had created, laughing softly because we couldn't believe this was real, crying because it finally was, that nothing could ever break us, that nothing could ever touch the bond we had forged in fire and perseverance, and I finally understood that love isn't measured by what someone has or what they give, but by what they stay, by what they endure, by what they hold on to when the world tries to tear everything away, and in that moment, watching him hold me and our daughter, watching him finally free himself from the secret that had weighed on him for so long, I realized that every hardship, every struggle, every tear, every sleepless night, every sacrifice, had led us here, to this truth, this love, this life we could finally live fully, freely, honestly, and I knew, deep down, that nothing in the world could compare to the feeling of finally seeing him breathe, finally seeing him honest, finally seeing the life we had dreamed of with our own eyes, because it was real, because it was ours, because it was love that had survived everything and would survive everything else, and as I held both of them close, the warmth of our tiny family surrounding me, I felt more alive than I ever had, and I knew, I truly knew, that this was only the beginning of everything beautiful that was waiting for us. The days after he told me everything felt surreal, like the world had shifted just enough to show me a version of life I had only imagined in dreams, quiet, impossible dreams whispered to myself in the middle of nights when I thought no one could hear me. I woke up that morning and saw him standing in the kitchen, our daughter giggling in her high chair, and suddenly, the way he moved, the way he smiled, the way he simply existed, felt different. He wasn't the same man who had paced the apartment in silent worry, the man weighed down by the unspoken secret of a life he hid from me. He was lighter somehow, freer, and I realized that the truth had lifted something from him, something I had only felt in small fragments before. We spent that morning laughing in the sun spilling through our tiny windows, talking about what we would do next, what dreams we would finally allow ourselves to reach without hesitation or fear, and it felt like every struggle we had endured, the endless nights, the tiny apartments, the constant exhaustion, had been nothing but preparation for this moment of possibility, when love could finally breathe without restrictions. I watched him hold our daughter, spinning her gently in his arms, her tiny giggles echoing like music I had never known I could hear, and I felt something in my chest swell so big that it hurt to contain it. He looked at me then, his eyes bright with relief and excitement, and whispered, "We're going to be okay. More than okay. We can have everything now." And I believed him, because I had seen him carry our life together through storms that could have broken anyone else, because I had watched him love in ways I didn't think possible, and because I knew, deep down, that whatever world he could offer us now wasn't what mattered most, it was his heart, his devotion, his honesty, and that had never been dependent on money or success or status. In the following weeks, we started planning for the next chapter, a life that would finally reflect all the sacrifices and love we had poured into each other and our child, the idea of moving into a home where we could breathe freely, where she could run and play, where we could decorate every corner without fear of losing our place, filled me with a kind of joy I had thought impossible to feel. He took me by the hand one evening and said, "I want this to be our home, everything we've dreamed of, but I want you to know it's not the walls or the furniture that matter, it's us, it's her, it's this family we've built together." And I nodded, tears streaming down my face, because he had spent so long hiding himself and now he was giving us everything he had, not just materially but emotionally, spiritually, entirely. Packing up our little apartment felt like leaving behind an old skin, bittersweet but necessary, and I couldn't stop smiling as I imagined our daughter running through hallways and laughing without worry, our lives finally catching up to the love we had always nurtured in the quiet corners of tired mornings and sleepless nights. When we finally walked into our new home, larger than anything I had ever imagined, sunlight streaming through the tall windows, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of fresh beginnings, I realized that nothing else mattered except that we were together, whole and unbroken, and that all the struggles, the challenges, the sacrifices had led us here, to this life of laughter, security, and love that didn't require hiding or pretending. We decorated slowly, intentionally, with every piece reflecting us, our story, our journey, and I watched him play with our daughter in the living room, the way he spun her around and laughed with a kind of abandon I had never seen before, and I felt my heart expand so much it felt like it could explode from the sheer happiness of witnessing it. Nights were still long and days were still busy, but there was a lightness now, a certainty, an unspoken promise that we could face anything as long as we faced it together. And in those quiet evenings, sitting on the couch with our daughter between us, I would trace the lines of his face, memorize every curve of his smile, feel the warmth of his hand on mine, and I realized that wealth had nothing to do with happiness or love. He could have all the money in the world, but if we hadn't built this life from struggle, if we hadn't carried each other through the hard times, none of it would feel real. And now it did, more than anything I had ever known. He leaned over one night, brushing a strand of hair from my face, and whispered, "I can't believe we made it here. I'm so lucky to have you both." And I whispered back, "We made it together. We always do." And in that moment, as our daughter slept between us, the house quiet but alive with possibilities, I felt an overwhelming gratitude, not for the house, not for the security, but for the journey, for the struggles, for the unshakable love that had carried us through every challenge, and I knew that whatever came next, we could handle it, that we had survived poverty, exhaustion, fear, and uncertainty, and that nothing could ever touch the bond we had forged. And sometimes, when I catch him watching me with her, smiling softly, the way only someone who has seen the worst and found the best in life can smile, I feel this pure, uncontainable joy, the kind that makes you want to tell the world how lucky you are, and I think about all of you watching, wondering how a life built from struggle could end in such peace and love, and I hope that somehow, seeing our story, our triumphs and trials, inspires someone to believe in the quiet power of love, the kind that survives everything and grows stronger. And if you're still here, listening, reading, feeling this with us, I want you to remember to share love, to hold on to those who matter, to cherish every small moment, and yes, if you feel moved by this story, consider leaving a like, maybe subscribing, because we want to share more of our journey, more of the little moments that make life breathtakingly beautiful, the moments that make the struggles worth it, the moments that show that love, real love, is the only thing that can carry us through everything. Life in our new home felt surreal at first, like stepping into a dream that we had dared to whisper about only in the darkest nights when exhaustion had made the world shrink to the size of our tiny apartment, but now everything was open, full of light, space, and possibilities that seemed almost too good to be true. I remember the first morning I woke up and walked into the kitchen to see him making coffee while our daughter played on the floor, her giggles echoing through the tall ceilings, and I felt a happiness so immense it made my chest ache, a kind of pure, unstoppable joy that I had only glimpsed in fleeting moments before, and for the first time I didn't have to measure it against anything else. There was no worry about rent, no fear of losing what we had, no silent panic about every little thing we could not afford, just life, breathing and moving around us, full and generous and ours. Every day became a new adventure in the simplest of ways, from decorating her little room with colors we chose together, to teaching her how to crawl and then walk across the polished floors, to hearing her call out our names with wonder and excitement, and I watched him with her and realized how deeply he had changed, how the weight he had carried for so long, the secret, the fear of being misunderstood, the worry about whether our love was enough, had finally lifted, leaving only pure, unfiltered devotion and joy, and I couldn't stop myself from smiling whenever I caught him looking at us, his eyes soft and full of an emotion I didn't need words to describe. We settled into routines that felt luxurious only because they were ours, mornings filled with sunlight streaming through huge windows, afternoons spent chasing her around the backyard, evenings where we cooked together and laughed at small mistakes, and nights where he would hold her to sleep while I watched, sometimes joining him on the couch, sometimes just standing quietly, feeling the warmth and peace that radiated through the rooms. And it felt like every struggle, every tear, every sleepless night we had endured had been leading to this, had been preparing us for the fullness of life we now lived. He started involving me more in his business decisions, sharing his plans and successes, but not in a way that made me feel distant from the struggle we had shared. It was as if he was inviting me into a world he had once thought I wouldn't understand, and I saw not pride or arrogance, but gratitude and trust, the kind that makes someone vulnerable, the kind that makes a bond unbreakable. Our daughter grew fast, her laughter filling every corner, her small hands exploring everything, and I watched him teach her about kindness, patience, and joy, and I marveled at how effortlessly he became the father we had both dreamed of being, even while juggling the demands of running his business. And every night, when we finally sat together, exhausted but happy, I felt the immense privilege of sharing this life with him, of holding the woman and the man and the family we had worked so hard to create, knowing that nothing could take this away from us. We hosted friends and family, celebrating milestones and birthdays, and it felt strange at first to invite people into this space that had once been just a secret hope, but soon we realized that sharing our happiness made it grow even more, and watching his face light up as our loved ones admired our home, our life, our daughter, I knew that he had finally found the peace he had been searching for, the validation he didn't need, and the love he had always deserved. Nights in our new home were quieter, but richer, filled with the soft hum of life, the gentle breathing of our daughter in her crib, and the warmth of his hand in mine, and I felt a gratitude so deep it sometimes brought tears to my eyes, tears of relief, joy, and awed how far we had come, at the obstacles we had overcome, at the love that had never wavered through poverty, exhaustion, and fear. He would sometimes sit with me in the garden, our daughter playing nearby, and we would talk about nothing and everything, about dreams for the future, about memories we treasured, about the simple, sacred fact that we were here, alive, together, free, and I realized that this was what happiness really looked like, not perfection, not ease, not wealth alone, but a quiet, steady life full of love, laughter, and shared understanding, the kind that could not be shaken by storms because the roots were deep, because the foundation was built on shared struggle, shared sacrifice, and unwavering devotion. On weekends, we would bake together, our daughter clumsily trying to imitate us, spilling flour and sugar everywhere, and he would laugh so freely that sometimes I thought my heart would burst from the sheer delight of seeing him so alive, and I joined him, letting go of old fears and worries, letting myself be fully present in the moment, in the life we had fought to create, and every time I caught him watching us, smiling softly, I felt that same mix of love and awe, the knowledge that the man who had carried secrets and fears for so long was now fully here, fully present, fully ours. And even though life wasn't perfect, we still had sleepless nights, disagreements, challenges, I never once doubted that we were exactly where we were meant to be, because the love we had survived everything, because the bond we had built was unshakable, and because we had finally earned the right to live our truth openly, fully, without fear or hesitation. And when I look at him now, watching our daughter grow, seeing the life we created together flourish, I realized that every hardship had been worth it, every tear had been necessary, every quiet moment of doubt had led us here, and if anyone watching this story feels inspired, feels hope, feels the possibility that love can endure, that families can thrive, that dreams can be realized against all odds, I hope you carry a piece of this joy with you, and if you feel moved by our story, don't forget to leave a like, maybe subscribe, and share the love, because life is too precious not to, and every small action can help someone believe that the beauty we found is possible for them too. It's strange how life works sometimes, how the moments that once seemed impossible become the foundation for everything that follows, and as I sit here now in our home, watching our daughter chase sunlight across the living room floor, her laughter bouncing off the walls, I can hardly believe the journey we've taken to get here, how every struggle, every tear, every long night, every fight, and every quiet moment of doubt has led us to this perfect, messy, beautiful life that we now live together, and I can see him sitting in the corner, arms crossed lazily as he watches her run, a soft smile on his face, the kind of smile that carries years of secret pain finally set free, years of love tested and proven unbreakable, and I feel this overwhelming gratitude, this realization that everything we endured was worth it, that every moment we feared the world might crush us only made us stronger, more connected, more capable of building the life we dreamed of. I remember our first apartment, tiny and crammed with too much hope and too little space, nights where the air was heavy with worry about rent and food and whether we'd ever see a normal night of sleep again, but even in that chaos, even when we were both exhausted and frustrated and sometimes angry at the world and each other, there was this undercurrent of love, steady and persistent, quietly demanding that we hold on, that we believe in what we were building together, and that foundation carried us through everything, even when I didn't realize it at the time. And now, years later, watching him play with our daughter, teaching her to balance on the stairs, laughing when she nearly falls but catching her just in time, seeing the pure joy in his eyes, I understand that love isn't just about the big declarations or the financial stability, it's about showing up every single day, even when it's hard, even when life seems to press against you, even when you feel like you can't breathe. It's about being present, being patient, being tender, and above all, being consistent, because those are the moments that truly matter, the ones that build a life that can withstand anything. I watch them together, him whispering something to her, her tiny face lighting up like she understands every word even if she doesn't, and I remember the nights when we were too tired to hold her properly, when we argued about money or work or sleep, when it all felt impossible, and I realized that those nights were the ones that forged this, that taught us to fight together rather than apart, to trust, to forgive, to love with everything we had even when we were running on empty, and I feel an immense pride, not just for the life we live now, but for the journey we survived to get here, because it wasn't easy, and nothing worth having ever is. There are mornings when I watch him sipping coffee at the kitchen table, our daughter tugging at his sleeve asking him to play, and I catch myself thinking, we made it, as though saying it aloud might shatter the fragile perfection of the moment, but it doesn't, it only makes it more real, more vibrant, more ours, and I know that the little things, the way he holds her hand while she eats, the way he kisses the top of her head when she falls asleep, the way he laughs at my clumsy attempts at cooking, are the things that build a lifetime, the kind of happiness you can't buy or borrow, only create together. And the house, our home, which once felt like just walls and furniture, now feels alive, every corner filled with memories, every space echoing with laughter and love, and I realize that all the struggles we had, the secrets we carried, the sacrifices we made, they all led us to this place where we can be fully ourselves, fully free, fully together, and that freedom is a kind of wealth that can't be measured in dollars or possessions. It's measured in moments like this, in the quiet mornings, in the soft nights, in the joy of watching our daughter grow with the knowledge that she is surrounded by a love so strong it will never fade. I sometimes catch him looking at me, and there's this expression in his eyes, a combination of awe, gratitude, and relief, as if he's still stunned by the fact that I stayed, that we built this together, and I know that everything he hid from me, everything he feared I might reject, was not about deception but about fear of losing the one thing he loved most, and now that he has nothing to hide, that fear is gone, replaced by a calm confidence and joy that lights up our home, our life, and our hearts, and I realize how lucky we are to have found each other, to have persevered, to have chosen love even when it was hard, even when the world seemed stacked against us, because that choice is what led us here, to this infinite, quiet, overwhelming happiness that fills every corner of our lives. And as our daughter tumbles over her toys, laughing, calling our names, and he scoops her up in his arms, spinning her around, her tiny hands clutching his shirt as if she's never going to let go, I feel this deep, steady certainty that no matter what comes next, we can face it, together, with love that has been proven, tested, and triumphant, and I know that this is only the beginning of a life full of moments like this, full of joy, full of laughter, full of connection, and that we are finally, truly living the life we were meant to live. And maybe someday our daughter will look back at these moments and understand the depth of the love that carried her here, the struggles her parents endured for her happiness, the way we built a home out of nothing but determination and heart, and I hope she will carry that with her always, knowing that love, real love, is patient, enduring, and worth every sacrifice. And so I sit here, watching them together, feeling my heart overflow with gratitude and peace, knowing that the journey we took was long and hard, but it brought us exactly here, to exactly this life, and if you've stayed with me through our story, if you've felt the emotions, the highs and lows, the laughter and tears, I want you to know that it's possible, too, for love to survive everything and for happiness to come in ways you never imagined, and if our story touched you even a little, consider leaving a like, maybe subscribing, because I want to share more of the little moments, the lessons, the joy that life gives when you hold on to love, and remember, the most important thing in life is the people who are there with you, the hands you hold, the hearts you cherish, and the love you never let go of, because that is what makes a family, that is what makes a home, that is what makes life worth living, forever and always.